Hey guys, let's head back down to the White House and visit with Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the 36th President of the United States and was sworn into office following the November 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Upon taking office, Johnson, also known as LBJ, launched an ambitious slate of progressive reform aimed at creating a great society for all Americans. Many of the programs he championed championed, like Medicare, Head Start, the Voting Rights Act, and Civil Rights Act, had profound and lasting impact on health, education rights, and civil rights. Despite his impressive achievement, however, Johnson's legacy was marred by his failure to lead the nation out of the quagmire of the Vietnam War. He declined to run for a second term in office and retired to his Texas ranch in January of 1969. Lyndon B. Johnson was born on August 27, 1908, near Central Texas community of Johnson City, which was named for his relatives. He was the first of 5 children of Sam Early Johnson Jr., a farmer, businessman, and state legislator, and his wife, Rebecca Baines Johnson. The young Johnson graduated from Southwest State Teachers College, now Texas State University, in San Marcos, Texas, in 1930. To help pay for his education, he taught at a school for disadvantaged Mexican American students in South Texas. His first-hand look at the efforts of poverty and discrimination on his students made a deep impression on Johnson's sparked him and a lifelong desire to find a solution to these problems. Did you know, in 1967, Thurgood Marshall, a civil rights lawyer and great-grandson of a slave, became the first African American to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. He was nominated by President Johnson, who called it the right thing to do, the right time to do it, the right man, and the right place. In 1931, Johnson moved to Washington, D.C. to serve as congressional secretary for newly elected U.S. Representative Richard Kilberg of Texas. Energetic and capable, Johnson began to meet influential people and learn about the national political process. On November 17, 1934, he married Clara Alta Lady Bird Taylor, a fellow Texan with whom he later had 2 daughters, Lydia and Lucia. Lady Bird Johnson, a soft-spoken but well-educated woman from an affluential family, became a critical part of Johnson's political success. In 1935, Johnson returned home to become the Texas director of the National Youth Administration, a New Deal program of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a political hero of Johnson's that helped young people find jobs or volunteer work during the Great Depression. Johnson's political career began in earnest in 1937 when he was elected to U.S. House of Representatives as a Democrat. Quickly earning respect as a smart and hardworking legislator, he was re-elected 5 times. After an unsuccessful run for a U.S. Senate seat in 1941, Johnson became the first member of Congress to volunteer for active duty in the military when the U.S. entered World War II. Johnson reported for active duty in December of 1941 and served in the U.S. Navy as a lieutenant commander until all members of Congress and the military were recalled to Washington in the summer of 1941. In 1948, Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate following a brushing Democratic primary. After crisscrossing Texas by helicopter, Johnson managed to eke out a victory in the primary by just 87 votes. Once he reached the Senate, Johnson showed a deft political touch. In 1953, at the age of 44, he became the youngest person ever to serve as minority leader of the Senate. 2 years later, when Democrats won control of Congress, Johnson became the Senate Majority Leader. His ability to work productively with Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower and his party behind important legislation made him a powerful figure in Washington. In 1960, John F. Kennedy, the Democratic presidential nominee, invited Johnson to be his presidential running mate. Johnson's presence on the ticket attracted the support of conservative South Democrats and helped lift Kennedy to a narrow victory over Republican candidate Richard M. Nixon. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was shot while riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Johnson was sworn in as president later that day aboard Air Force One, and immediately reassured a shocked and grieving nation that he would make Kennedy's progressive vision for America a reality. Soon after taking office, Johnson declared a war on poverty. He reactively pushed Congress to pass legislation attacking illiteracy, unemployment, and racial discrimination. After routing Republican candidate Barry Goldwater by more than 15 million votes in the 1964 presidential election, Johnson introduced a slate of new reform that he would build a great society for all Americans. His ambitious legislative agenda created Medicare and Medicaid programs to provide federal health insurance for the elderly and poor Americans. It also included measures aimed at improving education, preventing crime, and reducing air and water pollution. Johnson also made great strides in attacking racial discrimination by signing the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. His wide-reaching achievements improved the lives of millions of Americans and contributed to economic growth and prosperity. Despite Johnson's success in promoting his domestic reform policies, his presidency was also defined by the failure of his policies towards Vietnam. Like the three presidents before him, Johnson was determined to prevent North Vietnamese communists from taking over the U.S.-supported government of South Vietnam. A believer in a now discredited Domino theory, Johnson worried that America's security depended on containing the spread of communists around the world. As a part of this effect, Johnson steadily escaped U.S. military involvement in the Vietnam War. The number of American troops in Vietnam soared from 16,000 when he took office in 1963 to more than 500,000 in 1968, yet the conflict remained a bloody stalemate. As war dragged on, and American and Vietnamese casualties mounted, anti-war protests rocketed college campuses in cities across the U.S. Johnson's popularity within his own party plummeted as well. When it appeared that he might face a stiff challenge in the 1968 Democratic presidential nomination, Johnson announced his decision not to run for re-election. Following the inauguration of Republican President Nixon, Johnson retired to his Texas ranch, where he spent the next few years establishing his presidential library, which opened in 1971 on the campus of the University of Texas in Austin, and writing his memoirs. Johnson died of a heart attack at the age of 64 on January 22nd, 1973 at his ranch. And with that, I will see you all in the next one.